Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. Today I'm collaborating with scrapbook.com as I share 3 ways that you can use modeling paste on your fall card making projects. I am using Cloud Whip modeling paste on my cards today. This is a thick medium with a matte opaque finish. It does have a little more body than your usual texture paste, which results in a multi-dimensional design with a lot of texture. Now I have the 12-ounce container, but if you wish to just give this Cloud Whip a try, there is a 2-ounce size available on the website. To create the 3 cards, I'm going to use cozy pattern paper, boho cardstock, leaf dies, and some stencils. I will also bring in a few additional supplies as I create the project, and I'll add those to the list of supplies below, along with a link to the Cloud Whip paste. I'm going to place a white cardstock panel onto this project grip mat. This mat is designed to keep all your projects, inks, and stencils from slipping. The stencil is a more delicate design that might move with that thicker paste, so I'm going to secure it with some mint tape. This is my first time using Cloud Whip, and I'm surprised how thick it is. I'm going to stir it, but it is difficult to do with my arm injury. So I'm going to place a dollop of this onto my work surface, and I'll mix it a little bit. As I'm mixing the paste, it's starting to soften. I do need it to be a little thinner for this detailed stencil, so I visited the scrapbook.com website and discovered that I could add some water to the paste, which is helping quite a bit. I'm going to apply the paste to the stencil using a small spatula. This is a great way to place that paste randomly onto the stencil. Now this modeling paste has a very rough texture, so I'm going to smooth it out with this large scraper. This also helps fill in some of the gaps I missed. Instead of filling in that entire background, I'm going to create a partial leaf design that goes in a diagonal across the cardstock. This will create a little space where I can add a stamped sentiment. Now, just like with any modeling paste medium, you need to wash everything right away. The project grip mat was really easy to wipe down with a wet paper towel, and now I can move on to my next card. For this second design, I'm using that oak leaf stencil, which I've secured just like before. This time, I'm going to add some terracotta pops of color to the Cloud Whip. This is a new bottle of pops of color, so I need to remove the little red stopper. I like to use a set of tweezers to pop it right out into the trash can. I'm going to add a small amount of this color to the Cloud Whip. This will lighten a bit as I mix it together. It's best to start with a little bit of color, mix, then add more as needed. With the last batch of Cloud Whip, I added water to dilute it. This time I'm just letting the pops of color do the job of thinning the paste for this delicate stencil. For this application, I'm adding the Cloud Whip along the edges of the card panel. I plan to add a wreath in the middle, and I don't want any added dimension in the center of the card. Again, I added the Cloud Whip with a spatula first, then removed some of that texture with the spatula. This one has the same delicate autumn background as before, but that addition of color really makes the design pop. Alright, for my final card, I'm going to mix Cloud Whip with embossing powder. Just like with any embossing powder project, I'm going to brush some anti-static powder on the cardstock to prevent my embossing powder from adhering to other parts of the card. The mum stencil is such a great fall design, and it's going to look beautiful in copper. I want to cover this entire panel with Cloud Whip, so I'm placing it randomly onto my stencil with a spatula. And then I'm going to run the scraper over it to smooth it out and fill in the gaps. With this delicate design, I do have to move that scraper around the stencil in a few different directions. This just helps to ensure that I don't miss any part of the mum image. I'm going to carefully pick this panel up and lay it on a piece of paper. While the Cloud Whip is still wet, I'm sprinkling some Brutus Monroe copper penny embossing powder over the top. You can use any color of embossing powder that you wish, but I have discovered that finer powders provide better coverage. After I remove that excess powder, I'm going to heat this with a heat tool. As the embossing powder begins to melt, the cloud whip will begin to puff up and bubble. This creates a thicker image than what is seen on the two previous designs. Now be cautious not to overheat the design. Modeling paste makes the powder heat faster, and if it's overheated, it will burn the plastic in the embossing powder. While you continue to watch this amazing process, I would love it if you tap that subscribe button and let me know that you're new here. If you're already a subscriber, let me know that you're enjoying this card making project by tapping the thumbs up icon or leaving me a comment below. I would love to know which cloud whip technique you want to try on your next project. Alright, now that our backgrounds are finished, I'm going to show you how to assemble all three cards. The first card is going to use the terracotta colored stencil design that we added to white cardstock. The background paper is a beautiful floral design from the Cozy Paper collection. To distress the edges, I used a nail file. The design for this card will have 3 leaf images that I cut from pattern paper. To create the distressing, I used a nail file. Not only am I going around the edges with a file to make that white core show through, I'm also going to add a vein down the center. This can be done by folding the leaf in half and sanding along the folded edge. Alright, let's quickly assemble this first card. To bring in more of a rustic feel, I'm adding a little ink around the edges with a foam blender. Once that's complete, I can adhere this to the center of that pattern paper panel. The 2 wreath circles are being adhered together with Artiste glue. This is going to give me a thicker dimensional wreath without using any foam tape. The white circle is the center cut of that fancy circle. I'm going to stamp my sentiment in the center of this with some midnight ink. I'm going to adhere the scallop circle and stamped circle to the center of my card. As I said earlier, I tried to avoid adding any cloud whip behind this because I didn't want that white circle to have any texture behind it. Like most creators, I changed my mind in the middle of the project. After adding the yellow plaid leaf, I discovered that it was too similar in color to the cloud whip. The back of this pattern is a solid dark brown, so I'm just going to flip over the leaf, sand it a bit, then I will adhere it to the circle to create the start of my wreath. These 3 leaves are being popped up with some foam tape. Once they've been added, I'm going to embellish the card with some marine pops of color. If you're unfamiliar with pops of color, I have a video on my channel dedicated to this embellishing paint. I have discovered that you can flatten your dots by tapping the back side of your project after you add the paint. Of course, every wreath needs a bow. The bow die is part of the Cozy Autumn Leaf collection. To bring out the details, I sanded along the lines. Now our first card is complete. Let's move on to the next design. For this card, we're going to use that lovely copper colored mum design that was created with cloud whip and embossing powder. I'm going to adhere this to the center of the pattern paper background. Then I'll bring in a horizontal strip of paper and place the leaves across the piece. The pattern paper has been stitched around the edges. This can be done with a sewing machine, by hand, or replicated with a white gel pen. This is a stencil template from Brutus Monroe. I love adding stitching to my projects, and templates make it so much easier to create designs. With an embroidery needle, I'm adding a zigzag image to the 2 side leaves. This is a really simple stitch design that's great for those who are new to adding stitching on their projects. On the center leaf, I'm going to create a simple line. You can choose to add any of these stitch designs to your leaves or skip it altogether. I'm using 3 strands of embroidery thread to create those stitch designs. As I said, these are very simple stitches to create. I'm just using those pierced holes as my template to create the zigzags. And then I'll use the same amount of thread to create a back stitch for the leaf in the middle. Here's what the finished piece looks like. I love how the copper stitches really bring out the colors in the background. The last item I'm going to add is a small organza bow adhered to the center of the leaves. All right, let's move on to our final card. This is the white panel with the cloud whip leaves that were placed in the diagonal design. I have already adhered this to some pattern paper, and now I'm going to add a small bundle of leaves at the top. The leaves have been embellished with some stitching. I used a piercing tool and created stitching holes along the embossed veins that were created by the dies. With some black ink, I'm going to stamp the sentiment "Just a Hello" on the lower left side of the card. This is one of the reasons I didn't cover the entire card with Cloud Whip. It's not easy to stamp on modeling paste. At the top, I'm creating a cluster with the stitched leaves. These are popped up on foam tape to give the card even more dimension. After I arrange those 3 leaves on the front of my card, I'm going to top them off with a twine bow to make it look like they've been tied together. All right, let's take a look at the 3 cards we created today with Cloud Whip. On this first card, I kept the stencil leaf design very simple. Instead of filling the entire panel with Cloud Whip, I created a partial diagonal design that left room for a stamped sentiment. The second card has the same leaf design with a little bit of color. This was created by mixing Cloud Whip with terracotta pops of color. It's such a simple technique that you can use on many of your projects. The final card just makes me feel all the fall feels with a copper color and stitched leaves. The background was created by layering embossing powder over texture paste, and I love the way it looks. If you are new to using Cloud Whip, here are 3 simple card projects you can try. I chose an autumn theme for my designs, but you're welcome to recreate them for other occasions. By simply changing the stencil image, the paper, and the die cuts, you can easily create more card designs with Cloud Whip modeling paste. I hope you give a few of these techniques a try. If you're one who likes to pin photos to inspiration boards, I have edited still shots of these cards in my scrapbook.com gallery and on my website for you to use. The links to those can be found in the description below. I want to thank you for joining me today for this card making project. If you would like to see more of my creations, you can visit my channel or follow Miss Carrie's Creations online. If you have any questions about this project or the supplies listed below, feel free to leave me a comment. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.